I meant actually civil war.
Civil war,
Yeah.
in which I predict in the book, and I think many people would agree with me, the liberal secular forces of Israel will lose. They will lose to the more messianic, to the more extreme, the more right-wing groups in Israel. They are the majority in electoral terms.
This was Professor Ilan Pappé. He's a historian, a truth teller, and one of the most courageous voices to emerge from within Israeli academia. The timing of this interview was no coincidence. We recorded it on June 8th, that's the 59th anniversary of the USS Liberty attack, a defining episode of suppressed history in US-Israeli relations. But that date intersected with another poignant milestone. Just 2 weeks earlier, on May 23rd, I believe it was, we had the 78th anniversary of the Tantura Massacre, which is a forgotten chapter in the Nakba and the central focus of our conversation. For Professor Pappé, Tantura is not just a subject of academic inquiry. It's a personal and professional crucible. His decision to expose the truth behind what happened cost him dearly. It virtually reshaped his career, it exiled him from his homeland, and forever tethered his scholarship to the struggle for historical reckoning. That's why I had long looked forward to this very conversation. It adds crucial depth to the first-hand testimonies I previously recorded in Amman and in Germany, where I spoke with two survivors of the massacre. One of those interviews is already published, the other one will follow shortly. Until relatively recently, the Tantura massacre remained largely unknown outside of Israel. That changed only after a controversial public debate and the release of a powerful documentary in, I believe it was 2022. This documentary brought new global attention to what had been systematically erased. The story of Tantura is not linear. It's complex, it's deeply contested, and it still reverberates today because it's woven into the moral fabric of the ongoing conflict that we see in Gaza and the West Bank. An interview is always too short, so in the limited time we had, we couldn't cover every dimension. So for those wanting a fuller picture, I have published a detailed expose on Substack, exploring the Tantura massacre in depth, alongside a separate investigation into the USS Liberty incident, both of which form a broad tapestry of buried truth. You will also hear us reference a number of additional sources during the conversation. All relevant links, interviews, documents are included in the description. This is not just an interview, it's a confrontation with silence, a call to remember, and a challenge to the narratives we have been told. Professor Ilan Pappé, what a pleasure having you. I really appreciate you spend your time on a Sunday with me.
Thank you, Thomas. It's a pleasure to see you and talk to you about these important issues.
You're too kind. Professor, couple of things. So for the benefit of our audience, I would like to discuss Tantura today with you for two reasons. First of all, we had the 78th anniversary of Tantura about 2 weeks ago, May 23rd, and your life is, and forgive me if I'm exaggerating, in my point of view, life is deeply interwoven with Tantura, and we're gonna come back to that in a moment. Now, today is the 59th anniversary of an incident that less than 1% of the Americans have ever heard about. It's the USS Liberty incident. I will ask you for a moment to explain what it is. I just would like to mention I have published an extensive expose on Substack on this incident. I have interviewed a survivor from that ship. It's also online. And 2 days ago, I have published my interview with former CIA analyst Ray McGovern, where we also have discussed the USS Liberty incident. But now, very briefly, Professor Pappé, what was or what is the USS Liberty incident?
Yes, the SS Liberty was an intelligence ship belonging to the American Navy, which had all the technology for eavesdropping and intercepting conversations that were in the air that made its way to the Eastern Mediterranean. And as you say, it started working when the war, the June 1960 war, erupted on the 5th of June 1967. 3 days into the war, this particular American Navy that had a very clear American Navy and American national flag waving on its desk was attacked by the Israeli Air Force, which caused it huge damage and a large number of casualties. So the question people asked was, why did Israel, or why the Israeli Air Force, bombard a ship belonging to its most important ally in the world? And it took time for the Israeli official explanation to come. When it came, as probably would have been expected, it was claimed that this was done by a mistake, that the ship was not identified. And this was time of war, and it was identified as an enemy warship, which is quite bizarre because, as I said, it was clearly waving the American flag, and it's not very likely that they didn't know what ship they were attacking. So here comes the second question. Why did they attack the ship, which they, I think, knew was an intelligence ship, namely that it had all this equipment to listen to something that went on, a communication that went on between Israeli military forces on the ground. I don't think we'll ever know exactly what was the kind of information that was intercepted that Israel thought was harmful. I have my guess, which is shared by quite a lot of scholars, that they intercepted some atrocities that Israel committed in the Gaza Strip around the 8th of June, whether it was the killing of unarmed Egyptian prisoners of war or attacking some of the population in the Gaza Strip. But it's very difficult to substantiate it as long as, of course, we won't have access to Israeli documentation on that. And I don't think the Israelis would ever allow us such an access. But it's very clear that something that Israel didn't like for the world to know was intercepted by that ship. And given what you do as an historian, you go back to that day and ask what happened on that day that could have been, undermining Israel's self-image, external image. And there were quite a few things that were done there vis-a-vis Egyptian prisoners of war and the local Palestinian population that could have been the cause for that kind of attack on the ship.
Today, there is no doubt that the Israelis knew it was an American ship because we have the intercepts between the pilots and the ground control. I have a link to that intercept on my Substack article. The pilot were so baffled, they repeatedly asked the ground control, "It's an American ship. Are you sure? Are you sure?" And not only that, the ground control sent them back again and again and again. So that was not an attack. They wanted to sink the ship. Yeah. Then
Absolutely.
torpedo boats came. The largest casualty number came from a torpedo. Yeah. But I would like to very briefly run something by you. So there are three potential reasons. One you just mentioned. The other one is Syria, that Israel wanted to go into Syria and America wouldn't have wanted this. But the most striking theory, I'm not sure even if let's not talk about semantics. Yeah, but there is a
Okay.
reason in the background that I found really amazing. Not surprisingly, and we can see this by Netanyahu till today, they want to drag the US into the war. And that was also true at that time in 1967. Yeah. But at that time, Egypt was supported by the Soviets. So I heard that already. I mean, it's a complex story because the USS Liberty was able to send one distress signal out for a sailor who kind of improvised an antenna to the Sixth Fleet. The Sixth Fleet already sent help, and they were recalled by McNamara and the president, Lyndon B. Johnson, and the president, knowing that their sailors are being slaughtered. Yeah. But the theory behind it is that Israel wanted to sink the USS Liberty to blame the Egyptians to get that's also the reason why they wanted to sink that boat, to have no witnesses, yeah, to blame Egypt. And I hear that there already were two fighter jets en route in the air to attack Cairo with a nuclear payload. Yeah. So if that is true, and again, I have this from several sources, and it's also publicly available information, then we had another incident in the world where we just on hair's breadth avoided a nuclear confrontation between the US and the former Soviet Union. Yeah. So this is not as what I want to say with this is not a small incident. But very quickly, what do you think about this let's say hypothesis that it might have been to blame the Egypts?
I I find it not very convincing, I must say, because I studied the Israeli documentations and on the eve of the June 67 war and during the first years, we're talking about a very, contrary, by the way, to popular perception, we're talking about a very confident military and political elite. Remember, this is not anymore the Eshkol government. This is a Moshe Dayan government. They are absolutely confident they can defeat the Arab armies, that they don't need the Americans for that. And they are even surprised how easy already by the 8th of June the war was compared to even their own worst case scenarios. They've already totally destroyed the Arab air forces. And they were moving without any real difficulties into any part of the neighboring countries that they wished for. I'm not saying it's not probable. It's probable. It won't, as you say rightly, it was not the first time. And the nuclear option, Israel definitely thought about the nuclear option in 1973 when it felt that it was about to be defeated. But that was not the mood in June 67. So I cannot see it as a proper kind of consideration. But again, I'm not eliminating it. I'm not saying that this is impossible, but I feel that we're still talking about a political and military elite, maybe unlike today, that was not willing for the world to know exactly how atrocious and how many war crimes they committed. They were much more sensitive about international image of Israel than, for example, the present political and military leadership of Israel. They cared about what would be said about the Israeli army and its treatment of prisoners of war or the local population, unlike successive governments after that. So I find the first theory more credible in my eyes, but again, it's not easy, apart from the fact that you're absolutely right, that they knew exactly what they're attacking. Well, we're still left with the question of why, I think.
Hmm. Thank you for that. Now, I would like to come back to you. I have a couple of notes next to me. So, you are absolutely famous around the world. So, first of all, for me, it's a privilege to talk to you, but you're also infamous in certain circles, so much so that you were arrested by Homeland Security in 2024. Please tell us.
Yes, I was detained. I was not put in prison.
Ah,
To be
okay.
accurate, I was not sent to prison. I was detained in the airport for 2.5 hours by the Homeland Security agents when I arrived in Detroit in October 20. Actually, yeah, in October 2024, you're right. And I was interrogated for 2.5 hours. My phone was taken, everything on it was copied. I was asked bizarre questions about my political views, and then more concrete questions of who do I know in the United States, especially from the Arab and Muslim community. And eventually I was allowed to go in after the 2.5 hour interrogation.
Hmm.
Uh, Bizarre anecdote for which I never got a full explanation, although I used some senators I knew and so on to demand an explanation why it happened. Never received an answer. Just a vague idea that it was something to do with national security of the United States. But compared to what other people were going through, it was really not a big deal, I have to
Yeah.
say.
Was there not also an incident in Germany, or am I mistaken?
No, not with me.
Ah,
Some very famous colleagues of mine that should have been treated with respect and dignity
yeah,
were either refused entry into Germany, or in the case of Ali Abu Nima in Switzerland, were arrested. He was really arrested for 2.5 days. And again, no reason was given, and he was released without any explanation.
yeah. Now, I have two or three books that would like to briefly mention, your books, of course, yeah? But to give the viewer who are not aware of who you are a little bit of context, and please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah?
Okay.
You are one of a less than a handful so-called new historians, and that's because in the 1980s or so you had access, you and a couple of colleagues, one of which is Avi Schleim, which I've interviewed, another one is Benny Morris, which I've interviewed. You had access to Israeli states archives, and you started to publish some of the books that we will now discuss. Um, Apparently, the Israeli government did not really appreciate what you gentlemen wrote. And as to my knowledge today, those archives are closed again, also for academic research. So that makes you special as having had, well, for a number of reasons, yeah, for having had access to that kind of information. Then you also publish it as Israeli with a very lucid view on the factual historical facts that you discovered. And when we talk about Tantura, we will find out that you also paid a price. But the first book I would like to mention is a book that maybe it's already out. I thought it's not out, Israel on the Brink,
Yeah.
where you talk about the end of the Zionist project. Again, a book where you probably don't make yourself a lot of friends in Israel.
Yeah.
What is it? What is it about, and when does it come out?
The book will come out in October
Hmm.
2025. It claims that the conversation everybody should have, whether people are fearful of such a future or people are happy about such a future, the most important conversation is to, in the long run, is to understand that the state of Israel is not a sustainable project in the long run. By the way, I'm not the only one who says it. There are quite a few critics inside Israel itself who are warning that this is a possible scenario, and not that unique in that. But I'm trying to do it as an analyst, not as an activist. Namely, I'm trying in the book to show the processes of disintegration, whether it's a social implosion from within the Israeli Jewish society, a deepening economic crisis, the weaknesses of the army as they were fully exposed on the 7th of October, the growing international isolation of Israel, the fact that so many young Jews in the world don't want to associate themselves with Israel, and maybe the most important fact of all, apart from the Palestinian resistance and resilience, is that if you look at the world not as a world of political elites, but as people, as societies, the vast majority of the people would like to see a different kind of political reality in what today is Israel and Palestine. And that counts for something. It counted in the past for something. So I think these are long-term processes, but it's very good to talk about them now because I think many of them are inevitable. But the question is not always what does integrate or what does collapse. A very important question is what will come instead of it, in a way that if you care about human beings, you would like to see both Arabs and Jews surviving such a process. Because we know two things. While the disintegration continues, the Palestinians are the main victims of that process, because the brutality of the regime would become even worse if it will feel that it is not sustainable anymore, as happened in the last days of apartheid in South Africa. But the question is, what would happen after that? Will it be followed like in Syria, when Syria disintegrated by a long civil war, as happened also in Libya and Yemen? Or would we learn something from the processes of decolonizations in the past and try and build something better as soon as possible? There would be a win-win situation for both Palestinians and Jews. This is not a very good time to talk about living together. I understand it, especially for Palestinians. I don't think they like to hear about the future where Jews are part of their future. But if you distance yourself for a moment from the horrific realities on the ground today, you are aware that there are 8 million Jews living between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean. And as much as the Palestinians would never disappear from Palestine, also these 8 million Jews will not disappear. So you have to also talk about the future not as a group that has the power to colonize, ethnically cleanse and genocide the Palestinians, but as a group that at least the vast majority of it would still be part of the future of historical Palestine and the area around it.
Do you think Israel could collapse from within?
What I'm trying to say in the book is that in history, there's something we call discrete processes. Discrete here means individual processes that on the face of it have nothing in common. And each such process by itself is not powerful enough to cause a collapse. But the fusion of all these processes together is a transformative event. It can be very powerful. I'm saying it on the basis of study of how previous regimes and states collapsed or changed. You know, if you look at South Vietnam, if you look at the former Soviet Union, if you look at apartheid South Africa, at Syria, at Libya, I mean, we have more examples, I think, that people know of states that collapsed and regimes that fell. And it was never one process that brought them down. It was a combination. And there's this moment in history which you can never predict when it will happen. But there's always that moment when suddenly all these processes come together, although they have nothing in common, but they are powerful. It's a synergetic powerful. The sum of these processes is more powerful than each one of them. And even if you put them all together, they become like a tsunami that is unavoidable and unstoppable. I'm trying to show in the book how powerful they can be when they will fuse together. And the collapse from within the society is one of them, definitely. By itself, it still can produce, but you see, there is a dynamic here. What we call the implosion from within is actually
I meant actually civil war. I was
a civil
referring.
war
Yeah.
in which I predict in the book, and I think many people would agree with me, the liberal secular forces of Israel will lose. They will lose to the more messianic, to the more extreme, the more right-wing groups in Israel. They are the majority in electoral terms. But that means that there's no chance for a change from within Israel in its attitude towards the Palestinians. That by itself will increase the Israeli isolation. That by itself may narrow the gap between the solidarity that is very visible in the society and the indifference of the governments. And we already saw in the last week or so, or even the last 3 weeks, a change in the language of some European leaders, even in Germany. These are not anecdotes. These are indications that if I'm right in my analysis, that what we see today in Israel is the future, is not the present. It's also the future. Namely, the same kind of political elite will continue to rule Israel for many years to come. Then not only the language of European governments would change, I think that although their actions would change. So you see how these processes suddenly go together, the isolation and the implosion from within. Now, an isolation brings economic crisis. It brings an economic. Europe is Israel's best trader, or the most important trader with Israel. That by itself can lead to an economic crisis, not to mention other development and so on. So this is my point of view that even Israelis should think about it. Not just for Palestinians. I believe it is and hopeful scenario in the end of the day, because living under present Israel, and if I'm right, living under such Israel in the future, is the worst kind of scenario for the Palestinians. It's a scenario of ethnic cleansing, genocide, apartheid, victimhood on unprecedented magnitude level, on unprecedented level. So anything that is not that is better. Not to mention that I hope that with this would come a sense of that the Palestinians finally have the right to self-determination, for liberation, and most important, anything else, to live life as normal people on the basis of equality with other people. This cannot be done within the present political structure. So that political structure has to change. My prayer is that it will not collapse in a bloodshed, but rather in a more incremental and as much as possible peaceful process. But I'm not naive. I haven't seen any decolonization in history that was peaceful, unfortunately.
And at the moment, it seems it goes in the other direction. So Israel really tries to get rid of the Palestinians in both in Gaza and the West Bank. Very briefly,
You're
and
right.
I don't want to digress too far, yeah. But there's this, how's it called now? Gaza Foundation. So they cut the aid of UNRWA. That's a strategic move, yeah, because they had no control. Now they put a privatized mercenary company, which is owned by former mercenaries, to provide so-called food or aid to the Gazans. Yeah, I have seen unimaginable images where, first of all, the Palestinians they have to go in certain areas. Then I mean, we have seen the cages already on the checkpoints and so yeah, but this is they have to go into cages. It's worse like, I mean, here in Holland you have like 17 million people and 170 million chickens, for example. Yeah. So if I see these chicken transports, this is how I saw the Palestinians, yeah. And then they get shot. They are
Yeah.
told to go there to get food, and then they're shot by American mercenaries. I mean, how crazy can it get?
But Thomas, the question is for me different. I think that we reconciled with the fact that, for example, Europe, and especially Western Europe, was silent when in 1948 the young Jewish state expelled half of the Palestinian population. An expulsion was accompanied by massacre. We reconciled somehow with the fact and found explanation why, again, West Europe in particular, that is the EU and whoever is still in West Europe, were silent when Israel, during the June 67 war, expelled 300,000 Palestinians. We tried to understand why Europe was silent between 1967 and until 2023, when Israel imposed a ruthless and inhuman occupation on the Palestinians in the West Bank, and since 2006, siege on Gaza, and continued discrimination policy towards its own Palestinian citizens. All of that we understood that the European leaders told themselves that this is temporary, this is incremental. There's always a hope that around the corner a different reality awaits if only the Palestinians would choose the right leaders, and if Israel would have better leadership or something like that. And then came the genocide in Gaza. And we thought that maybe 3 months, 4 months into the genocide, this European indifference, especially this West European indifference and silence, would finally change. How? Because it was impossible to use the same explanation of why Europe was inactive before 2023 and say the same explanation applies to the genocide in Gaza. No, it could not, and they knew it. And a year passed, and still the indifference, the disregard continue. Why do I say this? Because there is a direct link between the escalation of the inhumanity that Israel is using and the sense of Israeli politicians that Europe maybe talks the talk but doesn't walk the walk. And maybe that nothing that Israel will do, or how extreme what Israel will do, would endanger its position in Europe, and definitely its position vis-a-vis the present American administration. I think there's a connection there between that kind of thing, and on top of it is this unbelievable, I don't know what to call it, hypocrisy among certain Europeans and Americans by allowing Israel to say, we are responding to some of your criticism by the kind of, the kind of structure that you have just described, which actually is used to intensify the genocide and later the ethnic cleansing rather than ease the humanitarian crisis. Um, uh, this is something that will continue, I'm afraid, unless the first European government, and I don't expect America to be the first, but I expect the first European government to go and impose full sanctions on Israel. And then hopefully others would follow. And then we will see whether I'm right or those like me who are right, that this is a significant historical development. In other words, if I put it in simple terms, West Europe, that is the EU and Britain, has the power to change the reality, the present reality in Gaza. I'm not talking about changing the whole trajectory of the conflict and so on. I'm talking about what you've just described. This can, Western Europe, the EU in particular, but also Britain and some other members of West Europe have the power to change it, but they don't use that power at all.
We could talk forever why that is. There are so many things in the background. APEC is extremely powerful.
Yeah.
I have an example in my mind. I'm not sure if it's wise to spell out. So Keir Starmer in Britain. I mean, you must have heard about it. Yeah, Keir Starmer. Apparently, three. I think a fourth one was now arrested. So-called male models have executed fire attacks on two or three of Keir Starmer's homes, inclusive his car. Now, how would they know the number plate of his car? How would they know where his houses are, etc., etc.? So there are wild speculations, of course, what's behind this, yeah. But I mean, Israel would certainly, if there would be a weakness, would certainly be inclined to, how shall I say this, use that type of information to, and Keir Starmer, I mean, is one human, one example, but this goes way back. So this covert operations, I mean, if you get, I'm sidetracking here, but if you go closer to Epstein and his facilitator, so what was his name? I forgot now. Her father, Robert Maxwell. Yeah, he found an interesting death floating at the sea. Now, what many people don't realize, Robert Maxwell sold high-tech equipment to governments around the world, which had the back door. You have to imagine, he sells high-tech encryption communication devices around the world to governments. And these devices have a backdoor through which Israeli intelligence has direct access to this kind of communications. Yeah. What I want to say with this is Israel has a history of utilizing that type of information. Yeah. And again, that's only one example of many why on a very direct personal level, so many American and European politicians, and I'm not even talking about money. How much money Israel pays for every single senator in the US Senate, etc., etc. Yeah.
Yeah, but definitely intimidation and such personal uh, in terrorism, if you want, is part of the lobby. But still, the main problem is beyond that. The main problem is that that Israel is a European project, and the European political and intellectual and academic elite regards Israel as part of Western Europe. And therefore, any criticism on Israel, I mean, genuine criticism of the very fundamentals of the problem, not of a policy here and there, is a self-censorship. It's a soul searching for Europe itself, because Europe never admitted to itself that it was the main power that allowed a Jewish state to be built at the heart of the Arab world. And why did Europe did it? Because it did not want to deal with its own racism towards the Jews. that reach an apex in the genocide of the Jews. So I think that the European inability to act is not only because of the power of intimidation or the power of money, which definitely plays part in it, but it's far more than that. It's almost decolonizing the European memory and understanding the European complicity and importance in turning the Palestinians to be those who are punished for Europe's anti-Semitism. And unless Europe begins to understand it, it would not adopt the kind of policies that are necessary. And again, it's not against one government or another. It's a totally different attitude to what still can be done in Palestine. You can't always return the clock backwards, you know. You cannot undo everything of the wrongs that had been done in history. But there are certain things you can do, whether it's a return of the refugees, whether it's building a country that belongs to the Arab world and not to Europe, whether it is creating a transitional justice that allows people to move forward and not backwards. All of this has to be done with Western Europe in particular, because it is the father and the mother of the project. Not only for it did not only help to establish it, it protected it until the Americans took over as the guarantor of this idea that Europe's anti-Semitic problems can be solved by building a European Jewish state at the heart of the Arab world at the expense of the Palestinians.
Noam Chomsky said to me, and when he said it, I had to wait a second to kind of realize what he actually said. He said the very existence of Israel is the greatest expression of anti-Semitism. And he said, of course, no one wanted them. So they put them into what they thought was a desert land. Yeah. So
Yeah, absolutely. A desert land, oh, you know, I think Noam is a bit wrong there. They knew it was not a desert. I think those who supported Zionism knew it was not a desert. But, you know, it was a desert in their eyes. I think that's
in
what they
their
meant.
eyes.
Not
Yeah, yeah.
objectively a desert. Yeah.
Yeah.
Subjectively for them, yeah, Palestinians were not proper human beings. And who cared about what some Muslims and some Christians among the Arabs wanted or didn't want at the age of colonialism? Absolutely, he's right.
Mm.
He's right.
Yeah, but not only that, it's not only vis-a-vis the Arabs, it's vis-a-vis the Jews. Nobody in Europe after the Second World War wanted them. That was the reason why they allowed
I agree.
Israel.
I agree. I
Yeah.
agree. Instead of pleading with the Jews to stay in Europe and promising them to build a Europe that would never experience the Holocaust and anything that came before it, it was much easier to go along with those Jewish intellectuals and along of Christian evangelical Christians who said, no, no, for theological reasons, for religious reasons, we want a Jewish state in Palestine. We want to redeem the ancient Jewish state, whatever the reason was. And they went along with them, not because they believed in the same theology, but because it really absolved them from dealing properly with racism. And Europe never dealt properly with racism. And now the victims of racism are not really Jews in Europe, but some other people.
Then the irony, of course, and we come in a moment to Tantura. Yeah? The irony, of course, is that then not enough Jews wanted to go to Israel. So
No,
Israel bombed Jewish targets in Egypt and in Iraq to scare the Jewish population in that country to join Israel. And one of those affected was Professor Abe Schleim, which has specifically talked about this topic.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, of course, the vast majority of Jews until the Holocaust did not regard the Jewish state as a solution in Palestine. Definitely nobody among the Jews in the Arab world thought that even at the worst moment of their life, the solution was to build a European Jewish state in Palestine. After the Holocaust, there were more supporters, understandably, more supporters for the idea, but it still did not cover the majority of the Jews. Many of them decided to try and live in countries which looked more promising in terms of democracy, values, and so on, whether they were in Britain or the United States. And some understood that they would be regarded as white people in Latin and Central America. So they went over there in Australia, New Zealand. And that was, in the eyes of many other Jews, a much better solution than going to Palestine.
Good. Professor Pape, if we now switch over to Tantura, and I know we could spend days talking about Tantura, but if we would like to encapsulate it, maybe you start. You encapsulate first the event in Tantura, what actually happened, and then we peel back how it affected you.
Yeah. Well, in Tantura, Tantura was designated as one of the villages that the young state of Israel that was established on the 15th of May, 1948, one of the villages between Jaffa or Tel Aviv and Haifa that should be cleansed in order to, as the Israeli army at the time put it, there would be Jewish integrity, territorial integrity, or continuity between Tel Aviv and Haifa. That was the idea. And in that area, there were about 64 villages that had to be expelled. In fact, 62 of them were expelled. We can go back later why two of them were kind of left alone and intact. But all the rest were occupied, destroyed, and expelled. And Tantura was no exception in that. I mean, it was doomed to
If
be.
I may, if I
Yeah.
may, just for verification, how many did you say? How many villages were?
64 villages were there, not on the road between high. If you take, they looked at the what they call the plain, the area between Tel Aviv and Haifa. If
Okay,
you look,
that's only,
it's
sorry,
like 30, it's 90 kilometers long and 30 kilometers wide.
okay, but these are not all the villages because there were more than 450 villages.
Yeah. I'm talking
Okay, okay,
about one section of villages that were
okay,
destroyed.
okay.
Already before the establishment of the State of Israel, a lot of villages were already destroyed, and most of the Palestinian towns were demolished before the 15th of May. So, if you want a better way of looking at it is until the 15th of May, 1948, that is the end of the British Mandate and the establishment of the State of Israel. We can't call them the Israeli forces because Israel did not exist yet. So let's
Haganah
call them
Irgun.
the Zionist forces or Jewish forces. You can call it what they want. Mainly cleansed the villages and towns in an area that the United Nations determined as a future Jewish state. What they were doing after the 15th of May 1948 is expanding the borders of the Jewish state as it was designed by the United Nations in its partition resolution in 1947, and they expanded the territory of the future Jewish state, and they began to ethnically cleanse the villages and towns that were designated to be part of the Arab United Nations state, if you will. And those 64 villages that I'm talking about were part of these villages that were supposed to be part of an Arab state. Tantura was one of them. And the method of expelling these dozens and dozens of villages was to negotiate their voluntary expulsion, if you want, namely to talk to the elders of the village, or if there was a leadership or a mayor, if you want, or Muhtar as he was called at the time, and tell them, you better leave now yourself. Because if not, and they always did it, they mentioned Deir Yassin, the massacre of Deir Yassin in April 1948. If you don't want to be massacred, if you don't want to be killed, we give you 24 hours, sometimes 48 hours to leave the village and leave to the West Bank or Jordan. Now, what happened in Tantura has happened in some other places. After an internal debate between the old generation and the young generation, it was decided not to leave in such a way. I think what people there hoped was that the Israelis would see that this is a peaceful village and they would let them stay, which was a mistake. There was no intention to do that. But what the second stage of every Israeli operation was, if they failed, and in most cases, by the way, they failed in convincing the people to leave without any fight. So that what usually they did, they would surround every village from three flanks, three directions, and leave one direction open, so that after shooting and bombarding of the village, people would begin to run away, and they would leave them in open direction so that they could leave the villages, and that would make it easier to occupy it later on and take control of it. Now, in some cases, as in Tantura, by miscalculating, the village was surrounded from all four directions, not three directions. So the army entered the village, and most of the people were still there, contrary to their idea that they would not be there. So they were left, which happened to them many other parts, with a huge number of young Palestinians, which they regarded as a potential military force, although these were not soldiers. These were young Palestinians who were civilians, right? And not only in Tantura, in some other places, this led to execution of these young people so that they could not be the military force of the future. Some of them were imprisoned, some of them were executed. Apart from it, while the village was occupied, and that also happened in other places, because the very small number of defenders were able to inflict some casualties on the Israeli forces, there was a revenge stampede into other parts of the village. And there was an indiscriminate shooting of people left and right. And altogether, more than 200 people of the village died, either by being executed on the coast or by this revenge journey, as happened, for example, in Deir Yassin at the time, that this indiscriminate killing of people. And in the end of the occupation, the women and the children who survived were moved to another village, Faradis, and then into the West Bank and Jordan. And the young men who were not killed were moved to prisoner camps and stayed there for a year and a half. And after that year and a half, most of them were expelled to Jordan and Syria. Some of them were allowed to return later on and stay in Israel. Now, this is the story of Tantura. For some reason, although most of the massacres were told by Palestinians, this one was less known. It was less known. And an MA student by the name of Teddy Katz, who did an MA dissertation on 5 villages in 1948, among them Tantura, without knowing beforehand that this is what he would found out both in the documents and from interviewing both Palestinians and Israeli soldiers who participated in the occupation of Tantura about the massacre. And to his great surprise, this massacre was not mentioned for instance, by the great Palestinian historian Walid Khalidi, who enumerated all the massacres, or by the Israeli historian Benny Morris, who was quite pedantic in mentioning most of the massacres that occurred in 1948. So he, in one of the chapters that was devoted to Tantura, he exposed that massacre. Being a Zionist scholar, by the way, he did not find that so bizarre. It's saying that's what happened in the war. Of course, he did not accept the Palestinian perspective, that the massacre was the result of Zionist ideology. But very much like Benny Morris, he said that's what happens in a war and so on, but there's no need to hide it. It's foolish to hide it. And that was his, both his worldview and the detailed description he had. Now, a journalist, by coincidence, a journalist read this dissertation and thought it was worth a piece in his newspaper, in a weekend supplement of his newspaper. And then all hell broke out for this student because at the time in the University of Haifa, the most important people in the university had very close connection to the army and the Secret Service. And they heard that some of the people who gave testimony to this student admitting their part in the massacres were very angry that he published it. I don't know what they expected him to do with this testimony. But anyway, they said it was defamation and slander, and they pressured the universities to suspend him. and to force him to say that he lied about what happened. And he was exposed to an immense pressure from the university to retract from his finding, which he foolishly did when these soldiers took him to trial. The trial never happened, but before the trial, he, under the pressure of his family, his lawyers who misled him, I mean, one of the lawyers, a Jewish lawyer, his Palestinian lawyers, and Avigdor Feldman advised him to go on and be truthful to what he found, because he did not fabricate any evidence. But he signed a confession that he fabricated evidence. 8 hours after he did it, he regretted doing it, went to the judge and said, I wrote this confession out of pressure. And the process went that the judge said, I cannot give you every 8 hours a different, verdict. So I'm not giving a verdict. She was actually a judge. She was a bit honest. She said, I'm not going to determine whether there was a massacre or not. So she didn't really she didn't find him guilty of fabrication, but she was not willing to absolve him from fabrication. She said it's not. She said it's not a criminal issue. It's not a judicial issue. It's between you, the historians. Solve it between yourself. I'm not going to, I'm not going to judge it as a judge. Which, by the way, I think from her perspective was right. I think so. And the Supreme Court of Israel did the same, by the way. It refused to determine whether there was a massacre or whether Katz was fabricating evidence or not. What is important is what the university did. The university forced him to rewrite the dissertation, send it to examiners that they knew were very hostile to him, who gave him a very low grade and failed him. And the old version was taken out of the library. He was disqualified as an MA student and was condemned. After being first condemned as a fabricator, then he was condemned as a sloppy and bad researcher. That's when I intervened to protect him. He was not my student. I did not supervise this dissertation, but he attended some of my classes, and I knew him quite well. And I knew he was an honest person. I totally knew that. And I checked the evidence myself after the whole affair blew up. And I was definitely convinced there was a massacre, both on the basis of documents and oral history. And I began to defend him publicly. I said the university did a shameful thing by not standing behind him, which would have prevented the whole legal procedure. As the judge, by the way, clearly said, had the university said, we trust our research students, there would have not been any process in the courthouses. But the university said, we don't trust him, with no evidence why. I mean, they created a kind of an inquiry committee that found 6 insignificant mistakes in the thesis that led to the decision to force him to rewrite the dissertation. Anyway, I accused the University of cowardness. I demanded that his MA would be returned to him. I wrote my own research on Tantura, demanding that I would be sued as well, if that is the case. Of course, nobody dared to sue me for that. I was too famous already at that time. But it totally deteriorated the relationship between myself and my university. It was not the only reason. I also was very critical of the Israeli policy since 2000, since the second Intifada. I was very critical of the policy. I continued to insist that 1948 was an ethnic cleansing. I also supported the boycott of Israel because of its policies. All of that led to the decision of the university to get rid of me in 2006. But definitely Tantura played part of it. It was not the only reason, but for me, it was important not only for the sake of someone I knew, like the student himself, Katz. As I said, I didn't share his politics in that respect. But for me, it was important because I think it was done in order to send a clear message to Palestinian students. Look what we have done to a Jewish student who dared to question the narrative of Israel. Imagine what we will do to you if you do that. Because naturally, Palestinian historians who are part of Israeli academia want very much to examine their own history. It's only natural. But this is something the Israeli academia could not allow. And I think that's why he was treated the way he was treated. And that's why I was treated the way I was treated. To say it's one thing to be a professor of mathematics and criticize Israel. It's another thing to say, out of my professional history, I'm telling you that Zionism is colonialism, that Israel committed ethnic cleansing, or that Israel is an apartheid state. That's a different kind of validation of a criticism on Israel.
Hmm. There's one element that I really would like to emphasize because I'm not sure everybody picked it up. So Teddy Katz actually interviewed former members of Haganah, Irgun Lehi, whatever they were,
Haganah.
and Haganah, and he had them on tape. So that's really important to say. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And one last thing that I'm missing. So yes, you left the university, but you also left Israel. You're living today in London. Now tell us why that was.
Yes, the whole campaign against me of the University of Haifa that erupted around the Tantura affair, but other affairs as well, 2001, 2002, led to best way to define it. I became for a while, but a short while, public enemy number one. To the extent that the Ministry of Education demanded from Haifa University to expel me. A journalist in Israel called on people to assassinate me. And we got a lot of death threats as a family. So we decided, at least temporarily, to leave. We had small children. And anyway, I could not work in Israel. It was very clear that not only was I dismissed from Haifa University, there would not be any other Israeli academic institution that would employ me. So I sought academic employment in Britain, and also for a while left with the family until things were calmed down a bit. And then I came back for a while. I'm going back here and there. But yes, that chapter ended in 2006.
I had another guest who also was for a brief period of time Israel's enemy number one, that's Gideon Levy. He
Yeah.
told me when he reported about the pilots, I forgot exactly the details, so there was a war, and he wrote a critical piece about Israeli pilots. He needed bodyguards in Israel.
Yes, definitely. He wrote about them as war criminals, and he was physically attacked in the market in Tel Aviv. So the newspaper allocated to him two bodyguards for a short while to prevent him from being physically attacked once more. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Keyword Gideon. By a interesting twist of fate, I was able to interview the daughter of, I'm actually not sure if I told you. I interviewed most recently the daughter of a soldier who apparently participated on Israeli side on the Tantura Massacre.
Yes, I think you told me last time. Yes.
And
Yes.
she recognized this seeing the documentary Tantura. But the one thing that she told me, one of her brother's name is Gideon. Now, why is that? One of the Israeli soldiers who was killed by Palestinians defending their country, this name was Gideon, and her father's best friend was this soldier. So her brother got the name Gideon. And you know from Gideon Levy that he also got his name based on that fallen soldier, Israeli
Yeah,
soldier in
that is
Tantura.
true.
I mean, how small is the world? And
Well, it's a small country. The Zionist community in 1948 was 660,000 people only. Among that, probably 10% were people who participated in the military operations. So it's a relatively small community. And yes, it was quite common to call newborn babies on the name of soldiers who fell in the battle. Yeah, that was true. Yeah.
when we talk about the Tantura documentary, maybe a little bit of context. So I saw this weird clips coming on social media where old guys cheeringly, laughingly, jokingly told how when they were young they killed Palestinians, they raped them, they burned them, whatnot. Yeah. So I looked a little bit into where is this documentary coming from. I identified Alan Schwartz as the producer. I reached out to him a couple of times. Initially, he said he would be willing to join me for an interview, but not now. As long as fighting is going on, he rather not. Then I contacted Hala Gabriel, which you know, who is also working on a documentary about Tantura because her family is intimately woven into Tantura. Her uncle is in this documentary from forensic architects. Her uncle, Dr. Adnan, whom I also have interviewed in Germany, and she was able to go into Tantura, so Israel now, Tantura, and amazingly, the only house that still stands from that period belonged to her family. And I was able to show her uncle, Dr. Adnan, after the interview on my iPad, how his niece sits on the steps of this ruin of this former family house. Yeah. This was such a powerful, emotionally powerful see for me as a bystander. I can tell you right now, time does not heal all wounds. This old man was sitting there for minutes crying in silence. Just seeing his niece sitting on the, it was incredibly moving. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where I want to go with this Tantura documentary is because this documentary done by a Zionist, I believe, and I have here, okay, it was funded by Israel's Ministry of Culture and Sports, the Israeli Film Fund, and the Israeli Fund for Cinema and Television, supported by the American Israel Cultural Foundation. It's a bit, I was thought, well, how is that possible? This is not a content that they would like to see published. Nevertheless, this documentary is out. It shows these old guys. Some of them, I believe, were even Teddy Katz had also interviewed. So basically, this documentary completely vindicates Teddy Katz and by implication also you.
Yes, in a way, and most importantly, it vindicates Teddy Katz, which is more important. I didn't need vindication, but you're right, it does. I'm not surprising that it's still a film that the Israeli cultural establishment in those days, I'm not sure today, but in those days was willing to support. Because I'm coming back to the point I made to you earlier about Katz, Benny Morris, and the same applies to Alon Schwartz. There are two ways of dealing with massacres like Tantura. You can look at them as they do, I think Morris, Katz, and Schwartz, as isolated exceptions that do not prove the rule, And therefore, it's stupid to hide them. We shouldn't be worried about talking about them. It shows that we are also humans. We are not superhumans. It's fine. We're normal people. And we committed some war crimes and we should admit it. But in the end of the day, it does not pose any questions of the validity of the State of Israel, the validity of the Zionist ideology, and so on. That's very important. Because after all, you have to remember, it is the labor, it's the Zionist left that committed the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, not the right wing. Or you can approach it the way I do, and most Palestinians do, and Hala Gabriel does, and that's why they are not that happy with Alon's film, by saying this is not an exception that proves the rule. This is one of many manifestations of what the Zionist project was all about. As we in the scholarly world call it, it is about the elimination of the native. Tantura did not occur in a vacuum, not in an ideological vacuum, not in a moral vacuum, not in an historical vacuum. The whole idea of settler colonial projects such as Zionism is that in order for the settler colonial project to succeed, the native indigenous population has to be eliminated. It can be eliminated by ethnically cleansing it or by genociding it, but it has to disappear. Otherwise, there is no hope for the idea of a Jewish state, especially for a Jewish, ironically, there's no hope for a Jewish democratic state if you don't expel the Palestinians. there was a very telling interview in I think 2011 with one of the commanders of the Israeli army that expelled, in his own confession, 200 Palestinian villages in the south of Palestine, 200 villages. And he said, imagine if I would not have expelled those villages. You would have today in the Negev, in the Nakab, in the south of Israel, another 1.5 million Palestinians, which would have been a disaster. That is what is important. That any additional Palestinian in historical Palestine is a disaster for Zionism. And as a Jew, as a humanist, you say, wait a minute, another Palestinian is a disaster? A human being who lived there for centuries is a disaster, is a demographic bomb, is a legitimate demographic target 3 years after the Holocaust. All of this does not come out in the film. And this is far more important to my mind than vindicating Katz or myself. I'm happy for Teddy. It really changed his life. And for that, I will always be grateful for Alon. It made life much easier for him. For me, it didn't change much. I didn't care that much about it. But I can fully understand how Palestinians feel about such an analysis. They did not need the film to know that they became refugees because they were expelled. What they wanted is the world to ask the question why they were expelled. And why are they still being expelled since 48 until today? That is the context we have to look at it. There is a direct line between Tantura and Jabalia in Gaza today. There's a direct line. These are not two separate anecdotes of history. They are part of the same chapter in history.
There's a red thread through it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
The old lady that I interviewed in Amman, survivor from Tantura, she wrote an autobiography in Arabic, and thanks to ChatGPT, I was able to translate it into English for my pleasure. I mean, I wanted to read this, yeah. And she describes in that they were at the end, a part of the journey, they were living in London. And she then tried to talk to people in London, and they were absolutely clueless. So she describes in her book how unfathomable it was for her, seeing what she went through, that nobody in the world knows about it. Yeah.
Yeah. When you are a victim of a crime and the crime is denied, you're victimized twice. Once when the crime happens, and once when people don't believe you that the crime happened.
Yeah.
And that was what Palestinians experienced since 1948, and what we call denialism. This kind of denialism accompanies the Palestinians' existence from the very beginning of the state of Israel in 1948 until today. Most European academics and journalists and politicians to this very day deny the Nakba. And therefore also deny whatever happened between the Nakba and until today.
I would like to, and I'm going on thin ice here. Yeah? So I said already, I interviewed another family member of Hala Gabriel, the gentleman Dr. Adnan in Germany, and he told me one thing, and up until now I've not spoken about it. Yeah. So he describes in the interview a scene, and again, the emotionality surprised me a little bit. My own, I mean, yeah. So he describes that they had to he and his friend had to dig a mass grave. And then they were forced to throw the bodies into that mass grave at machine gun point, thinking once they're done, they also will be killed. Yeah. And suddenly, because his friend, so they did it together, one body, they're heavy, so you need two persons apparently. Yeah? And then suddenly his friend said, "This is my father. This is my father." So his father was still alive. He was wounded, but still alive. So this gentleman had to throw his still living father in this mass grave under machine gun point, thinking they're next.
Yeah, well, the dehumanization reaches such levels of inhumanity. There's no doubt about it. And yes, it's important to go into graphic details sometimes, so that people understand what Palestinians experienced, what they remember, what they have seen with their own eyes. Uh,
I agree with you. There's a direct parallel to what we see today.
Absolutely. It was not it it is not Ben Gvir and Smotrich or Netanyahu. This is the inevitable consequence of years of indoctrination, ideological convictions that led to what we see today, but was already practiced in 1948, undoubtedly. But not enough people recognize it, and it's much easier to dehumanize the Palestinians than to accept that Israel was and is a project of settler colonialism that is based on the elimination of the native.
Professor Omar Bartov, I believe, I'm not 100% sure. Professor Omar Bartov told me there's a linear progression to genocide. First, dehumanization, that's really important for your own population support. Then ethnic cleansing. And then I'm paraphrasing here, if you can't get rid of them, you kill them. Where are we on that linear?
Well, unfortunately for the people of Gaza, it's clear that the trajectory has been completed. The question is, will the Israelis be able to do the same for the people of the West Bank and later to the Palestinians who live inside Israel? I hope not. And I hope the world will wake up and understand that what had happened in Gaza is a prelude in the eyes of the current Israeli political and military elite for the next stages towards the West Bank and the Palestinians inside Israel. So we can still stop some of the worst chapters that ahead of us, but some of it have already been happening. But one should say at the same time, the other side of the coin, the Palestinians will not disappear. They will be there. With all these atrocities, with all these genocidal policies, they are resilient and they will stay here in Palestine, historical Palestine. They will not disappear. And the big question is, coming back to the beginning of our conversation, is the world going to stand, the world and the region, by the way, is going to stand by and allow the process I was talking about to continue, which in the first stages would continue these eliminatory policies by Israel, but in the next stage would begin to see the disintegration and collapse of this regime, or it would interfere as soon as possible in order to pacify the country and to allow these processes to take place in a much less violent way, so that less and less people are affected so drastically as they are by it as they are now.
Mm.
That's
You just said something important. I completely agree. There is a complicity responsibility from the Arab countries. So one argument that I've heard a lot of times, nobody wants the Palestinians. Not even the Arab countries want the Palestinians. Yeah. So I mean, it's true. Is there not some, how shall I say this? Some change in point of view also needed in Arab countries to
but
solve the
it's not different from the rest of the world. There is a gap in the world, even in democracies and in non-democratic societies. There's a huge gap between the elites and their position on issues and the people. To say that the Arab world doesn't care about the Palestinians, you can only say it if you're talking about the Arab rulers. And most of them are rulers and not leaders. It's not true about the people. It's definitely not true about the people. This is why in the 1930s, thousands and thousands of young people in the Arab world were happy to volunteer in the first Arab revolt in 1936. That's why so many of them volunteered in 1948. This is why so many young people in the Arab world, we saw it when Morocco played in the Mondial, identify with the Palestinians. This is why the Palestinian flag was waved high and above every other flag when the Arab Spring began, with the huge, massive demonstrations for democracy and freedom were in the Arab world. So it's not the Arab world, it's the political elites of the Arab world. But like any other political elites, they are totally detached. Well, surprisingly, it also happens in democracies, totally detached from what most of the people want and wish them to do. also on Palestine, but also on other issues. So yes, there is a complicity, of course. There is a complicity of the Arab world, but there is a complicity of Europe. As I said, Europe created the project. It's part of Europe. It is part of Europe. And Europe has to give up on it. It really has to give up on it and allow the Arab world to get it back. Because without that, there's no solution. If you keep it as like they tried to do with South Africa and Rhodesia at the time, if you try to maintain colonialist structures and projects long into the 21st century, you alienate the place itself and you alienate the region around. We need to stop it. I'm not saying it would be easy. I'm not promising any Israeli Jew that they will be very happy with the result. I'm not disillusioning anyone. I still think in the end of the day, it's a better scenario for everyone concerned. I do believe it's a win-win situation, but I'm not going to describe it as a walk in a Rosengard. No, it's not a picnic. Decolonization is not a pharmaceutical clinical process. It's a messy one, as we know from history, but it has to be done. And the Arab rulers are afraid from decolonization because it can also affect their own legitimacy and position. So, yes, Palestine is a key for a better world, not only in Palestine, but also in the Arab world as a whole.
Before we conclude this session, Professor Pappé, are you hopeful that in your lifetime you will see this change happening?
That depends how I define my lifetime. In a good moments, I define it as someone who might end the century, and then yes. If I'm more realistic and talking to my doctors, I probably won't be able to see it in my lifetime, but I'm sure it will happen. I'm sure it will happen. I don't know exactly when, but I'm definitely settled on the question if, which I wasn't for a while. It's not a question of if from my point of view, but it is a question of when, and I cannot say when.
Professor Ilan Pappé, it was my pleasure and privilege talking to you on a Sunday. I wish you all the best, and I will certainly buy your new book once it's out.
Thank you very much, Thomas. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.